show and let's go because I want to have some
Wow.
fun. I want to get you in front of somebody,
Oh my
man.
God.
So
Dude,
let's do it.
let's do it.
So
That's
you
cool.
pick the date and time, and I'll make it work. So
Let's do
I'll
it.
be flexible.
Holy cow.
Yeah. You ready?
Am I on camera?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Man, yeah. Oh my God.
So yeah, Julius. So thanks for joining me, man. You had just a hell of a career, and I think you're at that point right now to where you'll be able to look back at these times in your life and go like that was the precipice. That was the point where you already knew you're going to be successful, right? Because to get to this point, you're usually already thinking it. But now that you're here right now in this moment, like what runs through your head on a daily basis? Is it just total like family, workout, spar, train? Like, is there anything else that's going through your brain on these kind of days?
I'd say the biggest thing is I'm trying to keep the mindset of like that I haven't made it yet, or that I haven't accomplished anything yet, because I feel like throughout when I started doing MMA, I would set these different goals, and something I've started to come to realize is like the goals that I set sort of end up being sort of setting your ceiling. So it's like I remember when I first started, one of my big goals was to turn professional, and it was just like that was just it's just like I remember the first time I asked my coach, I was like, "Hey, do you think I could turn pro one day?" And he was like, "Dude, you could turn pro right now, but you would be beating guys off your athletic ability rather than your skill. So we want to get you to the point where you're doing it off your skill." I was like, "Okay, that's cool." And then I remember getting to I was like 5 fights into my amateur career, and I was 4-1, and I got a fight with the top guy, the number 1 guy, and I was super pumped about it. And I thought in my head, I was like, I'm gonna win this fight, I'm gonna turn pro, and then the floodgates are just gonna open from the heavens. And then I go out there and I lose, and then I lose my next fight after that, and I end up not turning pro for another 18 months, and I really needed that time. But I'd say the biggest thing right now is just like, obviously every fighter's goal is to, not every fighter, but most fighters' goal is to make it to the UFC. And I've tried to start to shift the mindset of like that the end goal is making it to the UFC to succeeding in the UFC and becoming a champion in the UFC.
Yep.
Because I feel like if I keep that mindset of like, oh, my goal is to make the UFC, I'll get to the UFC and I'll be like, I did it.
Yeah.
I'm done. And now I just want to make sure I keep that mindset of like, I'm still trying to grow farther, still trying to take that next step.
Yeah. Obviously, you know, the top fighter that you would be able to fight in the UFC might not be the top fighter by the time you make it there, but do you have like any aspirations of wanting to fight any particular person to like say, if I could beat this person, I'd be on top of the world, you know?
Man, the dream is John Jones, but
yeah,
he's already,
that's everybody's dream, right?
John Jones is, and nobody's ever beaten him. You know what I mean? There's not really another fighter that you can say that nobody has beat. Obviously Khabib, but nobody beat John Jones. So it's like to be the guy that did that. But man, if he's got more than 2 fights left, I would be very surprised.
Yeah, he's got a heck of a background too. So I'm real curious, how do you juggle the mindset of being a fighter and having a family and having, you know, very young family at this point for you? I mean, how do you juggle all that?
I would say the biggest thing, it's kind of like a switch flipping. And obviously every time that you're training, it's not, the way that I train is not always necessarily the way that I fight. But I would say the biggest thing is like with thinking about fighting, I'm just, competing with myself, and thinking about getting just a little bit better each day. Really the biggest thing with preparing to step in the cage is your physical fitness. I'd say whenever you're in like fight prep in those 6 to 8 weeks before a fight, the focus is pretty much just getting in shape. It's not necessarily adding new things or improving, just because you don't really have that much time to get super comfortable with it. And when you get in the cage, you're under all that stress to where you revert back to what you know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that time, you're literally just focused on getting in shape. But then when you're out of the camps, you have a little bit more time to focus on like improving and getting better and stuff. But I'd say the biggest thing for me is it's one of those things where like whenever I do go to the gym, I can shut my brain off to the rest of the world. So then whenever I come home and I'm spending time with my family, it's much more easy for me to be present and be in the moment. Obviously, as the fight day gets a little bit closer, they start to realize, they're like, man, especially if I'm cutting weight. If I'm cutting weight, my wife is just like, it'll get to fight week, and she'll be like, I'm probably going to spend a little bit more time at my family's house this week. And I'm like, great. Yeah. Go for it, baby.
Yeah, because it's hard just to flip it on the last moment because you can just feel like the moment coming, right?
Yeah.
You're just ramping up to it.
Yeah.
You mentioned something I think is that most people that haven't did it don't understand, and my version of it was whenever I was going through the law enforcement academy, they called it muscle memory, and they said, listen, like if you don't build muscle memory on know how to somebody attacking you and you know how to pull your gun and defend yourself to keep from getting killed in the moment, your brain won't be able to process it correctly. And so it was thousands or tens of thousands of repetitions of how to pull your firearm. And I remember they did this drill where we were supposed to pull our firearm, shoot a target in front of us, and somebody would get 30 feet away with a stick and they'd run and try to poke us in the side with the stick to see how fast we'd get our gun out. And I would say, and you think 30 feet, you think that's a long ways. I would say out of our group of 20, maybe 3 or 4 of us could fire a round before we get hit with the stick.
Yeah.
But it was that muscle memory, and they'd bring patrol cars out, turn the lights and sirens on. We'd be out there in dark. And when you just have that kind of chaos going on, you just have to you're just kind of in that fight or flight mode. And it's like whatever your repetitious training has been is what's going to come out. And if you've learned some new fancy roll and shoot technique or any of those things, if you try to just pull them out of your pull them out from wherever at the last moment and roll with it, like you could die in law enforcement, right? Or you could make a mistake and kill somebody. And so it was very repetitious. And sometimes I don't like boring, repetitious things. Like I could never work at a factory and do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
But when you're honing a craft and you can see that your skill set's getting better, and I think a lot of it also has to do with like who's training you and what kind of experience they have on training people the right way. And with fighting, it's the same with law enforcement. I had never shot a pistol before I got in the academy. And we had SWAT team guys that had spent years traveling around on like professional shooting teams. And they asked us, they said, who's never shot a gun? And a couple of us raised our hand. They said, who never shot a pistol? And it was me and one other person never shot a pistol. And they said, based on our experience, one of these 2 people will probably win the Top Gun award for the entire academy.
Yeah.
And I did. I won the Top Gun award for the entire academy. And it went from being a newbie to being an expert level shooter, but I had the right guidance through that process. And I think that, it's one of those things. It's like, oh, well, this guy's been fighting for a long time. It's like, well, does he have bad habits? Has he built in these bad habits where he thinks his way is the only way to do it? And that's why they say, I think it's kind of true. It's like hard to teach an old dog new tricks, right? So I'm curious, obviously you had great athletic ability, but learning your skill set, was it a deciding factor for you on like, who's going to be my coach, or was it just like you kind of took whoever was available that would work with you? Like, how did that thought process go?
Yeah. Well, when I started, it was just like trying out the different gyms around here and finding which one would stick.
Yeah.
And then as I've gone on, I've actually started to like build a team. Because MMA is one of those sports where you kind of have to have, especially if you want to get to the highest level, you got to have multiple coaches. Like you've got to have a coach that specializes in each different aspect of the game. Another thing to your point of you can't teach an old dog new tricks, I think that helped me was I didn't come from a wrestling background. I didn't come from a boxing. I had no prior martial arts background. And you see a lot of those guys have bad habits. Like if guys that wrestled their whole life, they have these habits from wrestling that don't necessarily work in MMA that you can
pick up on it.
Exactly. And it's the same thing, guys that box, guys that kickbox, guys that did Muay Thai, Taekwondo, whatever their background may be, if it comes from a different martial art, there's going to be bad habits because those sports are geared to that specific rule set and MMA is geared to the MMA rule set. And one thing I think that was nice for me is I came in training just MMA.
Yeah.
And I obviously did jiu-jitsu too. Like the gym that I train at, Team Fusion, I would say it's primarily a jiu-jitsu gym just because you can't really run successfully primarily MMA.
Yeah.
You're not going to have dudes that want to fight MMA are not going to be able to pay enough dues to keep your doors open.
Yeah.
Nobody gets into fighting for great reasons. And most of these guys are nowadays. It's funny. Like I get on the mat and half the time I'm either the oldest or the second oldest. And I'm 25.
Yeah.
That's
wild.
I'm like, these dudes are 18, 19 now that I'm training with.
Well, and I did very limited training 15 years ago when I was telling you about working with Glenn Cousins, but I would say, I would have been 20 at the time, and I felt like everybody in that class, there was definitely some younger people, but I felt a lot of them were probably in their late 20s, 30s back then, you know. But they're always getting hurt too. They always had injuries, you know.
Yeah.
So
well, it's funny because if you go to the jiu-jitsu class, that's the case. 100% at Fusion. If you go to a gi jiu-jitsu night, it's gonna be quite a few older people. A lot of the parents from kids class might have started signing up, stuff like that. And then you go to the MMA class, and it's all these 16 to 20-year-old idiots that signed up to get punched in the face. It's a horrible idea. You know, I don't recommend it for anybody.
But that's like your peak physical condition, right? Now you look at IndyCar racing, you look at NFL, you look at NBA. It's just like the age has just kept getting younger and younger, right? And it's like they found that their peak physical condition for the NBA is not a 35-year-old, right? It's, you know, those 18 to 24-year-old kids. And it's like, how do you get them young enough, right? And I didn't realize, and you know, I would say that the MMA world is going to have to do the same thing eventually to get that higher quality like you, where they can find you fresh and work on you. But it's like, how do they find them at 5 and 6 and 7 years old? And Sporting KC and most of the soccer league, they have these Sporting KC soccer leagues for young kids, and they track them the whole way through. And by the time they're ready to go in high school, they kind of know maybe what professional team they could go for. They start moving them around. They relocate them, their families, whatever, to get them on special, you know, different teams. And I think the MMA's, you know, to some degree just kind of been picking the cream of the crop as they come up, but I haven't seen like a real uniformed way to take young kids and put them in that exact process. I mean, like IndyCar drivers, I mean, they're little kids and they're in these races, and sometimes they're racing cars that are going 100 miles per hour and they don't even have a driver's license yet. It's like crazy to think about, like their entire life career is starting when they're in adolescence. And really, by the time they're probably 30, they're retired out of that career. You know, and that's crazy to think about how young people are retiring. I mean, when you see like talking about, you know, I've been talking about this a lot lately, like, oh, like how old's Travis Kelce if his brother's already retired? Like he's got to be way up there, right? And then you look at his age and you're like, man, he's still pretty young, you know, but he's kind of getting older for the NFL.
He's got some miles on him too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So what do you think about that? I mean, how much pressure do you think a superstar at that point, you know, a Mahomes or those guys, like they have to obviously block it out, but people won't stop talking about the three-peat, right? So I mean, do you think that affects their playing at all?
It definitely affects them. It's one of those things that I don't think that they would admit. If you ask them, they'd sit there and they'd tell you, oh no, I'm not thinking about it. But there's no way you have the opportunity to do something that no NFL team in the history of the NFL, a league that's been around since 1920, nobody has ever done it.
Yeah.
Of course you're thinking about it. You know,
if they do it, does that end the GOAT debate for best quarterback?
No. That debate will never end.
Or unless he wins more Super Bowls, right, than Brady. Like
He'll
that's
still never end.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, he lost to Brady twice in the playoffs. He lost to old man Brady twice in the playoffs. So he's always
I was at that Super Bowl, and that was my first Super Bowl I ever went to. Man. And I grew up hating the Patriots, hating Tom Brady. And I got to tell you, after watching Tom Brady beat the Chiefs and losing all that money to spend to go down to Tampa Bay, that was the first time I respected Tom Brady my entire life. I was like, okay, like he's proved that he's got what it takes. And he left his team, went to a new team, won a Super Bowl. I'm like, that can't be easy. And he did it without Bill Belichick, right?
Yeah.
So that was wild. So I mean, what's you know, what other than your goal of, you know, getting to the UFC, becoming a champion, other than that goal being there, did you set a timeline behind it? Like, I want to be at certain levels at certain times, like go into that process. Because I think what a lot of people miss is, and you might have picked up on this, is a lot of people have goals and aspirations, and they'll set a big, hairy, audacious goal, but they can't even take the stair steps to get there, or they really never get there because there's something else missing other than the goal, right? I mean, you got to have the grit, drive, and determination, but like you're probably putting some pressure on yourself on like what the timeline looks like, right?
Definitely. And if you look at the UFC's process right now too, they're looking for guys in their 20s for sure. If you don't see super oftentimes guys in their 30s getting signed anymore. That used to be more the case, but they're looking for guys that have potential to be champions. Yeah. They're not looking for guys to come in and do okay.
Yeah, be a one-hit wonder.
Exactly. They want guys that have the potential to become stars and become champions.
Be there 5, 6, 7 years.
If they can sign enough of those, then you're going to find one or two
yep.
that are gonna rise to the cream of the crop. I would say for me right now, my goal for 2025 would be to be fighting in the UFC by the end of the year.
It's awesome.
And then it's one of those things too where I just had to look at it realistically because in my weight division's the light heavyweight 205-pound division. There's only about 45 to 50 guys on that in that division at any given time. It's one of the smallest ones in the company.
Gotcha.
205 and heavyweight are two of the smallest, and then flyweight 125 are very small.
Mm-hmm.
Those middle divisions, 35 to 85, they're very populated. But in 205, if you win if you win your first two fights, your third fight is probably either going to be somebody in the top 15
wow.
or somebody just outside the rankings that will earn you a fight with somebody in the top 15. So you're fighting in the top 15 within 3 to 4 fights if you win your fights. So I factored that into my thought process too when I started thinking about when do I want to get to the UFC, because when I won a big fight in June of 2024, my fourth fight when I won my first title against Niall Bartling. I remember that was whenever people really started thinking like, man, like you could go to the UFC. Like, do you want to, like, how soon do you want to go? And my first thought was like, man, from the moment you make it to the UFC, you've got to be ready for the top 15 guys in the world within like a year.
Yeah.
And if you're not, you're going to get there, you're going to start losing. And the UFC is a company where they don't oftentimes let guys go backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Like once you gain that top 15 status, you're fighting guys in the top 15 and you lose 2 or 3 in a row and you're cut.
Wow.
So it was like, I was like, man, so I want to get there by the end of 25. And then by the end of 26, I need to be ready to fight the top 15 guys in the world.
That's awesome.
You know what I mean? And
yeah.
that, when I thought about it that way, I was like, man,
yeah,
that's a little daunting, but it's one of those things where it's like, I'm young, I know that much, and I'm still getting better rapidly. Like sometimes I think about it, I've only been training MMA for 5.5 years.
Yeah.
That's not a very long time in comparison to pretty much everybody I'm fighting. Most of the guys that I've fought in the last year have been pros for as long as I've been training.
Wow.
Let alone how long they've been training themselves. So I try to keep that in mind, and I understand like I do have some time, and maybe that my build could be a little bit different just because I am younger, and for my weight division as well, I'm younger.
Yeah. What's your normal weight you walk around at?
About 230.
Wow.
If I'm like training and I'm disciplined, I'm eating right,
mm-hmm.
I'll be like 228 to 230. If I'm training and I'm not disciplined and I'm just eating whatever I want, like whenever the wife's baking, sometimes she starts baking, you know.
I know that feeling.
Oh my God. Whenever she makes her twice baked potatoes, the next day I'm going to
eat the whole pan.
Those high 230s, man, for sure. Like I can get to 240 pretty quick.
Yeah.
But normally 230 or so.
Do you do anything else other than like diet and exercise? Is there anything else that fighters are getting into on like how to like kind of biohack themselves, understand like what works for you that maybe doesn't work for other people? Like, you know, do you ever do like blood tests to know like what, you know, if there's things out of whack that you should be working on? Like how serious have you gotten already?
One thing that is one thing I need to do. I've wanted to go get blood work done and then look at like all the levels of everything. One thing that I've definitely stepped up a lot would be my recovery in the last year. I got sponsored by a company called Counter Negative. They've got a facility. It's on South Fremont here in Springfield. And they have like the stuff that they have there. It's state of the art, like recovery technology. And part of the reason I know that it's state of the art recovery technology is because I just went to the UFC Performance Institute in Vegas. And at Counter Negative, they have the same red light therapy bed.
Nice.
They have the same cryotherapy chamber.
Cryotherapy works great.
They have the same sauna. They've got infrared sauna in there. They've got oxygen therapy.
That's wild.
Red light, cryo. They have a bunch of other stuff that I haven't even tried. Like they have something called a contour pod. I don't know exactly what it is. Yeah. I think some of the stuff in there I think is more for like the middle-aged women that want to like, you know, tighten up their skin.
Yeah, gotcha.
But then some of it is more for athletes for sure. So like when I go in there, I'll get like, they've got those compression boots, the Normatec compression boots. So I'll go in there and I'll do like red light therapy, and then I'll sit in the sauna for 30 minutes, and then I'll do the oxygen therapy and
that's awesome.
With the compression boots, and I always finish with the cryo because you get that energy spike.
Yeah.
That I think has helped me a lot because it allows me to just train more.
Oh yeah.
So like whatever you can do to train more is going to be good for your career, you know?
Yeah.
And my trainer, strength and conditioning coach, Taylor Ramsdale, he always says, you're never overtrained. Overtraining is a myth. You're just under recovered.
Yep.
So it's like if your body feels off, you needed to take more steps in your recovery. It's not necessarily, oh, you're overtraining. Just find a way to recover better, and you'll fix that gap.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't realize how widely adopted like red light therapy and some of these things. I mean, you hear about the cryogenic stuff with with like athletes and things like that, but red light like being used in this scenario where there was an NFL game playing, a player got injured, they had him on the sideline, they actually did red light therapy on his leg, like right there, like you could see the lights and everything they were talking about. I'm like, during a game? I'm like, that's crazy, you know. But it does work. I mean, when I got into hiking a few years ago, I started tearing up my Achilles tendons all the time, and I'm like, I've never had tendon issues. But tearing up your Achilles tendon, there's like no worse pain. I mean, I've cut and broke and did all kinds of stuff, and sometimes what I've noticed is if I push it before I am recovered, I can backslide. But if I don't stretch it and use it enough, then it stays, out of whack.
Exactly.
And it's like I'm 38 now, and I'm like, this kind of sucks. Like when I was in my 20s, I could get hit by a bus and get back up and go at it. And now that I'm getting older, it's like I feel like I spend more time trying to heal and recover my body than I am doing other things to, But yeah, it's just one of those things. Like we've got all these amazing medical devices that we can use that aren't just, a pill to block the pain.
Exactly.
It seemed like that's what it used to be back in the day. Everybody just would cram painkillers down, get shots, numbing shots, do different stuff, and then just go on. And I think that the science behind, and it's just all the Olympic athletes, it's all the professional athletes. It's like there's been so much money put into those sports now that they have to figure out how to run at their peak physical, mental condition, 24/7 when they're in those spots. But man, it seems like that people's bodies are so built up, when something goes wrong, it can go wrong in a hurry, and then you're out. But I mean, look at like Aaron Rodgers. I mean, people are like, oh, he's not coming back. He's not going to heal from that anytime soon. And he was walking around in a boot in like no time. And I'm just like, wow. I was like, I've been through that. That's not fun. Like, it's not a good thing. But what's some of the things in your mind that you think like the average Joe that says, man, I want to do something big in my life? I mean, have you been in this mindset since a toddler and since you can remember, or did like something happen that flipped the switch for you that said like, I'm not going to feel, complete until I hit something major? Like, did you have that? A lot of people, it's like the car wreck, the heart attack, the divorce, it's whatever, right? But then some people are just born that way. So what was it that got you here?
I would say, so my whole life I was really into basketball. I played basketball heavily, like as a kid. And the whole goal was to play basketball in college. When I got to high school, I had goals of like, I wanted to break my high school scoring record, and I wanted to, do various things like that. I wanted to make it to the state championship game or win the state championship, stuff like that. And then I remember accomplishing goals in high school basketball. And like I specifically remember we played a game. We were in Galena. That was in Galena, Missouri. We played them and we won. And I went down to the locker room and my coach was like, you know what happened this game? I was like, what? And he said, you scored your 2,000th point of your high school career. And I remember being like, oh yeah, that's really cool. And expecting like you expect like something big to happen.
Yeah.
And then I remember within 15 minutes being like, man, that was kind of, that was very anticlimactic.
Yeah.
And then similar thing happened. Like I broke the school scoring record, very anticlimactic. And then I went to go play basketball in college. And whenever I played in college, I think part of it was a lack of focus on my part. A big part of it was a lack of focus on my part. And me being into kind of the things that I shouldn't have been into. But also part of it was college basketball not being necessarily what I expected it to be. And me just not enjoying it as much. And I ended up having my basketball career end very early because I was just making so many bad decisions. I was getting in trouble. I had now, like, the girl I was with was pregnant, and I was playing at SBU, which is a Christian school, and you can't do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I remember I went in there and I tell my coach, I'm like, hey, so I've got charges pending. The woman I'm with is pregnant. Like, I've basically screwed the pooch in every way you can imagine, coach.
Yeah.
And he's like, so what can we do to keep you on the team?
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, there's nothing you can do. Like, he was like, if you take a drug test every week and you marry the girl, and I'm like, yep, nope, none of this is happening. So yeah, but long story short, basically, basketball was over, and it was one of those things where it didn't end on my terms, you know? And I kind of, that summer, I remember it was going into a summer, and I just kind of sat on my butt for 3 months. I was working overnights at a hotel at the time. I was still going to school, but I didn't have that much interest in what I was studying finance, which is really a very pointless major. You can't do anything with it unless I should have studied accounting in hindsight, but basically I had no motivation to do anything. I started gaining weight. I was very bored, and I'd always been interested in MMA and the UFC and stuff like that. And I had a buddy from high school who did jiu-jitsu, who was like, I hit him up one day and I was like, how can I start jiu-jitsu? And he said, you can go to a gym and do a class. Like, it's actually very simple.
Yeah.
It's funny because people ask me that all the time, and I tell them the same thing. It's like, just go to class and try it.
Yeah, you think it's this really hard thing to get into, and it's like you just show up and they let you try.
Right,
you know?
and every class they give you 2 or 3 free ones.
Yeah.
Every gym around you'll get 2 or 3 free sessions. So it's like literally just go try. They'll let you do it for free.
My best friend's manager was a Krispy Kreme manager in Springfield, and that's how I got into MMA back in the day. I was like, a Krispy Kreme manager? He's like, yeah, man, he's a great fighter. He's like, you should go join. I'm like, but I was so scared.
Exactly.
And like, I was terrified to walk in there.
Mm-hmm.
Out of all the sports I ever played, I think that the jiu-jitsu MMA, well, at least in my experience, they were like the most open and kind to allow newcomers in. Mm-hmm. And I don't know really where that mindset really comes from. I've never analyzed it, but just sitting here thinking about it, like that was the one sport that I went and joined, being out of shape, not knowing it, and maybe it was just because that was Glenn Cousin's mindset and attitude. Yeah. But like, he took me under his wing. He took me out and ate Subway like the very next day and asked me what my goals were, and I was just like, why are you so nice to me, man? Yeah. But like, literally, he set the trajectory for the rest of my life. Even though it was just getting in shape and not being very good at jiu-jitsu, but losing 100 pounds. Mm-hmm. That's how I got into law enforcement. That's how I got into building Sun Solar and doing everything else. That was the pinnacle moment where somebody believed in me enough to tell me that I could do whatever I wanted to do in life, you know?
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of that comes from, as long as they're good people, you kind of remember it. Like you said, it's a very intimidating and scary thing to go start. And for the people that started from nothing, they were all there at one time. Mm-hmm. And I think
what it feels like.
Yeah, I think the guys that can actually be self-aware enough and take the time to remember that, like, even if you are the best black belt, the best guy in the world, at one time you were just a white belt that didn't know left from right. Yeah. When it came to what you were doing on the mats. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that influences that positive culture. And obviously you don't see that everywhere you go, but I definitely think that it's pretty common.
After being such a big athlete in basketball, did you actually have any fear or any weird feelings trying to get into MMA? Like, did you feel any of that, like when you walked in the gym?
I really enjoyed sucking at something, to be honest with you. Like, I remember going, like, when I first started and like having no clue what I was doing. Yeah. And like just being bad, like
just because you knew it was such a challenge
exactly. And I loved it. It was like, man, every single day I learned something new. Yeah, you know, every single day I learned a completely new foreign concept that I'm like, oh my gosh, you know. And I really enjoyed like being a beginner at something. Yeah, because the whole time, you know, I'd been playing basketball long enough to where I wasn't a beginner anymore. And it was really cool it was literally like, you know, getting a new toy as a child or something, or getting a new video game. I was like, this is so cool. Yeah. You know?
So one thing that you hit on a while ago is I've felt the same way in business when I hit certain goals or I get some kind of national recognition or award. Mm-hmm. They might have an event sometime at night for that. And we'll go to the event. I'll win the SBJ award. I'll do whatever. Mm-hmm. It's like a fun little highlight. Mm-hmm. Either that night or the next morning I wake up and I'm like, I'm back to nothing. Like, it's not, it was a nice little dopamine hit, but like I'm back to square one. I've got to prove myself again, or I'm a nothing, you know? And I'm curious because it kind of sounds like you've kind of been through the same things in your career. How do you, because I haven't figured out yet, how do you learn how to appreciate the moments of the winning, but still have the drive to get higher, right? Like that's what I struggle with, is how to actually enjoy those present moments and not just think about the next thing.
Right there. That's the $1 million. Because I'd say every single time that I fight and win, it's the same thing. Like I'll just be on cloud 9, like right after. Anybody that's seen me fight knows that I start yapping and I start walking around the cage and mean mugging everybody and acting like I'm just the toughest guy on earth. And then, I give my interview, and even in the interview, like I feel like I interview just about as well as some professional wrestlers. I feel like that's my that might be the next step, is I might have to go the first UFC, WWE. I guess no, Brock Lesnar did that, but I'll do it too,
Yeah.
But you get 15 minutes goes by and it's like, man, what's next?
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest thing that I've tried to do that I think maybe helps a little bit is thinking about the process and appreciating like the work that you put in and being like, man, I did work really hard for this.
Just the journey side of it.
Exactly. I think it's a lot easier to appreciate how hard you worked than what you accomplished, because as soon as you accomplish something, that governor in your brain is going to start minimizing it and being like, well, if I was able to do it, it couldn't have been that hard. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, we're always the, the child that we once were, or the beginner that we once were in whatever field we're in. And I think being able to like appreciate the work and the journey and how far you've come goes really far, but it's tough. You know, when you've got that competitive mindset and that mindset of like, you don't have the small town mindset, you have the world stage mindset. It's really hard to appreciate anything.
Yeah. So I feel like I've went through bouts of extreme laziness, being 100 pounds overweight for where I really needed to be, being unhealthy, all that kind of stuff. Mine had led to breaking up with my high school sweetheart, not having any direction in life, not really having any aspirations. But if I did something, I would be highly, highly competitive, but I wouldn't always engage in things that maybe I would have been competitive in. It was like, if I knew I couldn't be good at it, maybe I wasn't even going to mess with it type mindset, right? But like, I was able to have that switch flipped, but it wasn't an overnight thing. It was probably when I was in the gym, lost 30 pounds in 3 weeks. It was kind of like, one day I didn't even own a scale because I didn't want to know what my weight was back then, right? And I remember going and getting a scale, getting on it, and I was like, wow, like my clothes fit different. I need to go buy new clothes. Like everything's so loose. And then one day I remember I like to do cardio because I just had never really did much cardio, and it was a way to just get out and enjoy nature. And I remember my goal was, no matter how much lifting and other things I do, I want to do a mile a day, just out in the open on the on the side of the roads, or on a treadmill or whatever. And that was my goal, just to make sure I was moving my body every day. And I remember one day my knee was really hurting, and it would just click and pop, and I was just like, I don't know what's wrong with it, but I'm young enough. Like, and my previous mindset would have been, hey, you just need to stop, don't hurt yourself, like all these excuses. And I remember literally that day I was like, I wonder how far I could push myself and where it could go. And when that switch flipped, I remember 2 months later, I had forgotten to take my running shoes. I was in like leather flip-flops that weren't that comfortable. And I remember running my mile in my leather flip-flops and my feet getting a little blood on them from just the blisters busting. But it was almost like, how far could I push my body at that point? But I didn't just wake up in that moment, right? And I think that so many people that have this, I want to be great, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a millionaire, I want to be a UFC fighter. It's like they're thinking about that if they can't operate that end goal day one on that journey, then where do they even start? Where do I even pick up the pieces, right? And I don't know if you're getting it yet. I mean, I'm obviously giving it to you a little bit by asking these questions, but it's like, are you at the point yet where people are coming up and like, man, how did you get there? Like, how did you do it? Like, people are curious about like your success, to some degree. Like, how are you winning these fights? Like, how are you beating guys that have so many wins behind them? I mean, what's your response? Just like, it's the journey, it's the training, it's the grit, it's the not giving up. I mean, what's your answer on something like that?
I'd say the biggest thing in MMA, something that goes really, really far, is believing in yourself. And I think that can overcome a disparity in skill.
Yeah.
And it can actually go a really long way. Like if you've got two guys of equal athleticism, equal physical stature, equal strength, and one is more skilled than the other, But the person that's less skilled really believes in everything they do, and they can fully commit to everything. And the other guy has a little bit of hesitation and a little bit of doubt in his mind.
Yeah.
I think that can flip that tide. And I think the biggest thing for me over the last, like my last 3 fights are really the 3 fights I think where I've really like started to rise and climb the ladder a little bit, because I started fighting good people. And I think that the biggest thing was like I would have the training camp and I would push myself hard enough in the training camp to where when it came time to fight night and it got down to the fight night, that I had a very different feeling than I've ever had. Like the last 3 fights I felt different than any of my other, like I've had 16 fights. The last 3 I felt different than the first 13. And I think that came from me feeling a sense of confidence and like I actually trusted my training. I was like, wow. I was like, I feel like I did everything I could do to prepare. And at the end of the day, this is a journey about getting better and becoming the best version of myself. That's really the number one person I'm competing with is myself. Because whenever you zoom out in life, everything starts to seem less significant. There will be things that you'll come to that seem so significant and so big at that given time, but you fast forward 5 years and you're like, that was nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and that happened to me a lot. So I think the biggest thing was fully committing myself to it, believing in what I was doing and the process that I was taking. And then that allowed me to relax myself a lot on fight night and just be like, I believe that I've done everything I can do and I'm okay with whatever outcome comes. Yeah. Because if there's one thing I've learned in MMA, it's that sometimes in life you don't know what's going to happen, and that's okay. We get used to being really in control and knowing what's going to happen and having a plan. Like, I mean, we start off in school when you're a child and you know what I mean? You literally are on a schedule. Yeah. Like you know what you're going to be doing at 12:30 p.m. on Wednesday every single week. Yeah. It's going to be at lunch. And whenever in MMA, you don't know what's going to happen in the fight. Like you can come up with the most elaborate, wonderful game plan ever, and it can get thrown out the window within 5 seconds. Yeah. So it's like
Mike Tyson's thing. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Boom. Right. But it's like just being okay with whatever happens. Yeah. I tried my best. I did what I could do to prepare. So whenever I get in there, we're just gonna find out.
Yeah. You know what's so amazing listening just, athletes' mindsets and people that are in your place, it's successful entrepreneurs have to have almost the exact same mindset as an athlete, right? And it's funny that my mindset is towards how to run the business of what I'm doing, and your mindset is how to run like your own business of yourself every day. But the mindsets are very comparable about like how you have to wake up, how you have to train, how you have to think through stuff. 100%. I mean, because I couldn't do what I do if I didn't have confidence in myself, right? But what's funny is it feels like every year, every time I'm down and out and I get through it and I learn something, I'm building more confidence. And when I look back and I think, oh, how hard was that when this employee did X, Y, and Z, or I didn't get a payment on that, or a customer did this and, threatened to sue me. Like those seem like the worst moments at that time. And now I look back and I'm like, those things are a breeze to me now. They don't bother me. I don't get an emotional response from them. It's just part of the everyday normal growing a business. And I think it's so fascinating that like the journey of an athlete and the journey of a successful business owner, they kind of go through the same trials and tribulations, but like that's what you have to like forge that mindset and get to that place. And I think so many people that I've ran into, they want the results, but they don't really want to go through those trials and tribulations. Maybe they aren't used to leaning into that pain or being okay with that kind of pain or rejection or whatever, right? But like I find it hard to coach those people that are coming to me and go, well, how'd you create a multi-million-dollar business? Like I started this company and I want to do this thing. And I'm just like, well, you start asking questions. You're like, well, you really haven't been through the hard stuff yet. You're pretending that you want to be successful, but like, are you working 100+ hours a week doing it? Well, I've got all these other things I need to go do. And it's like, well, then do you really want to do it or do you not? And so, I mean, I don't know what the magic thing is to tell people other than just like, you really need to be able to lean in and feel the pain and just learn that being uncomfortable means that that's the spot you can grow. Like if you're comfortable in life, but you want more, then you're going to have to just put yourself in uncomfortable situations. And that's the only way I really know how to explain it. Cause I just look at myself and go, when I'm in an uncomfortable situation, when I don't want to wake up and put on that suit and go to a political event or go to that business meeting or do whatever, when I push myself and I do it and then I see the success, I'm like, oh yeah, I had nothing to worry about. That was just the little voice in my mind that says, oh, you don't feel good today, or you might have a headache, or this might happen. And then once you push through it so many times, the thought never really goes away, but the voice becomes quieter, is what I would say. You know, I don't know if the voice will ever go away. I think it's some healthy skepticism to have that voice, you know, that drives you. But I mean, what was there that moment when you were in work? You said you were doing you were like hotel customer service type work. Was there a night or was there a night or a time where you just were like, I've got to do something different? Like, did something happen to where you knew this switch was flipped in, or did it just slowly happen as you got into the MMA gym? And
I actually can specifically tell you there was a day that I was there, and normally I worked overnights, but occasionally they would have me come work 3 to 11 instead of 11 to 7, and I was working 3 to 11, and they had a scale in the back room, and I remember it was me, there was a manager, his name was Eric, and there was 2 girls working, and for some reason the topic of how much everybody weighed was getting discussed, and I had not stepped on a scale since I played basketball in college, and when I played basketball in college I was never over 225 pounds. That was pretty much the max that I weighed was 225 when I played basketball in college. Because I remember I used to tell girls I'm 6'5", 225 because I thought that sounded cool. You know what I mean? But sorry, Paige. Sorry, honey. But then we stepped on that scale, and I was fully clothed. Like I wore dress pants and a button up and everything. I had dress shoes on and a belt. But I got on that scale and it said 272. Oh, wow. And I was like thinking like, I quit playing basketball 3 months ago. It's August. You know what I mean? Like what happened? And I remember I had started looking in the mirror in the morning and being like, man, I don't look as good as I normally do. I didn't look fat yet just because I have such a big frame that I can carry a lot of weight. But I was like, man, I've got to do something. I've got to figure something out. And I was also just so unhappy. Like I felt like there was nothing I had that I was trying to do anything less than the bare minimum. There was nothing I had that motivated me to try a little harder or push myself to the point of maybe I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Yeah. There was nothing I had that was like that. And that's something that MMA kind of became for me. And it's one of those things where it's like, I try to find out like, what can I do in training that's going to be hard? Yeah. Because if it's hard, it's probably helping me. Yeah. You know, and it's like finding those things and being like, I'm going to do that. You know? Yeah.
So now that you're a dad, so I was in law enforcement when I had my first son. I looked at my world for myself drastically changed the moment that I held my son for the first time. Thinking about my career, thinking about my safety, thinking about what I want to do in life, thinking about how to keep him protected for, you know, I first thought, oh, I got to keep him alive for 18 years. And I'm like, oh, wait, no, it's a lot longer than that. Right? It's a forever job. Did you have any kind of mental switch whenever you had your first kid?
Big time. And then especially as she got older. My daughter was born 1 week before my first fight, like to the day. So when I had my first, 1 week after she was born. And like, it definitely had a shift in my mind of like everything that you do, the things that you can do as a, like you do things for yourself, you don't necessarily get to do that anymore. And also it was a really big shift for me, and it was a little bit hard at times because whenever Rainey, my daughter, was born, I was 20. And her birthday is actually almost exactly my half birthday. So it was like 20 and a half. And I was like, man, I was so young. Everybody that was around my age was still going out to going out to the club and doing all this stuff and partying, and everybody was still in college, and nobody had any responsibilities yet. And then it's like, boom, I have a daughter that it's a 24/7, 365 responsibility. You know what I mean? There's no, you can just, if you're not with her, you need to figure out where she can go, you know? And I think that definitely shifted my mindset a little bit, and it made me to make fewer self-destructive decisions. Yeah. I think I had a tendency to do things that were a little bit self-destructive because I was like, well, let's see what happens. Being, you know, a teenager, a late teenager, early 20s guy. And I think that was the biggest mindset shift for me, is it was like a little bit more self-preservation, and then just more motivation. Like it's definitely, having a kid is 100% a motivating factor in your everyday life.
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the biggest benefits that it gave me.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Man, one thing that you said I thought was cool that I would jump in and add to is, you were like, if I'm not confident in business, nothing you're is going to work. And I think one thing that's important too is, as a leader, you know what I mean, you having confidence, it's a trickle down effect.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Big time.
Your whole staff and everybody below you looks to you, and then you having that confidence and that ability to like show that everything's good goes a really, really long way.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because in sports, I think there's a similar effect. Like whenever you are portraying confidence, your teammates will have confidence, your coaches will have confidence, everyone around you will have a little bit more confidence, just because you seem that way. And I remember my MMA coach was talking to me about when I fought in June, this Niall Bartling, that wrestler. When I fought him up in Kansas City, my coach was like, he told me it was the most nervous he'd ever been for any of his guys fighting. And then me and him, at one point, I remember everybody had kind of left, and it was just me and him, and we were sitting there in the locker room area, and we had kind of found this little spot off to the side. Normally when you're at these fights, you'll have a locker room that's essentially just one big room with a curtain in the middle, and the blue corner's over here and the red corner's over here. And so you're really just around everybody getting warmed up. And it's actually a really interesting time, because you'll see the guys go up and then they'll come back. And you know immediately if they won or lost.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You'll see guys come back. I've seen dudes that got knocked out so bad that they got back there and they sit down and they cry for their mom. You know what I mean? And you've still got to walk out and go fight. That I remember with my first few fights, that was so like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But I remember we're sitting back there. We found a little spot off to the side where kind of nobody's really around us. And we were just talking about like things and, you know, the journey and how it had gone. And I remember him telling me, you were just so calm and you seemed so unbothered by everything that my confidence skyrocketed. And I was like, I feel like we've got this. And it's interesting because anytime you get down to the week of a fight, everyone starts to treat you differently. Everyone asks you, how you feeling? You ready to go? You ready? How you what you gonna do? You know?
Everybody's trying to hype you up a little bit, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And everyone's trying to, everyone's gonna say positive things to you and build your confidence and stuff. But when you portray that confidence, it's almost infectious and it builds up the whole group. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. So the big question that I have is what is something that somebody like me could do to help you get to that next level? Like, or somebody listening, like, what is the thing that you need other than just like Dana White to see this and go, oh, sign him up, right? Like, is it more people sponsoring you? You know, we've sponsored you in the past. You currently have a great solar company sponsoring you now. Is it somebody just like writing a check? Is it somebody getting, you know, other UFC tickets down on the floor where you get closer? I mean, what is it that you're looking for that you'd say, hey, this is what I want to call into existence to happen for me?
Yeah, all of those things that you said are obviously super helpful. And then beyond that, I would say like every little, like this right here is helpful. You know what I mean? Whenever you do these kind of things, it shows the UFC that you're willing to take the time to promote yourself and allow people the chance to get to know you. Because one thing here is anybody that's listening and watching got a chance to get to know me a little bit better.
Yeah.
And that's a super, super valuable thing as a fighter, because it allows them to have some level of personal connection to you and gives them a reason to want to watch you fight. Because the two ways that I think that you can provide value as a fighter is by one, being a good fighter, but then by two, people actually wanting to watch you fight. And that is honestly, once you get to the highest level, that's debatably more important than how good you are. If you look at who makes the most money, it's not necessarily always the best guy.
Yep.
Conor McGregor is not the best fighter in MMA history. He's up there for sure.
Yeah.
But he's not the best fighter in MMA history.
He became the hype man though. Big hype, you know.
And he'd made way more money. Nobody else has touched that guy when it comes to money. And the whole reason the company's where it's at, they got sold for $4 billion because of him.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing. And then things like a share, you know, sharing stuff.
Sharing the content.
buying a ticket, watching the fights, all that stuff goes a long way.
You already have another fight scheduled, don't you?
Mm-hmm, February 22nd at the Shrine Mosque.
Yep. Where do people go to get tickets? I mean, we'll put the link in there, but is there an easy way to find tickets?
There's on synergyfights.com. That's their website, the promotions website, and they would have a link to tickets. Make sure you put that I referred you. And then also I always have tickets in hand that I'm always able to sell as well. Oh yeah. At Julius-Walker-1. You can hit the Venmo for whatever. You know what I mean? Cash App, Dr. J30.
Do you see any UFC fights coming up that you want to go get down close to the ring on?
Oh man, any of them. I've heard rumblings of is a potential event in Kansas City or St. Louis coming up this year. Because what I heard through the grapevine was that the UFC is trying to do Kansas City or St. Louis once a year, one of the two.
Yeah.
And then I've also heard that they're doing an event in Des Moines, Iowa, I think on May 3rd. Now, there's not a lot of things I would go to Iowa for, if I'm just being completely and brutally honest. But a UFC event is one of them.
Yeah.
So that would be really cool. That would be insanely cool. And honestly, if the UFC wants a semi-local guy, to fight on that card, I can also, you guys have my number at this point.
For sure. So what I'll leave you with this is that whether it's a sponsorship or not, because I don't want to step on your toes with the other sponsorship, I want to kick you a couple thousand, but I also want you to find that UFC fight you want to go to. And if it's just me and you and you need to take somebody that's maybe got some relationships, let's go. You pick the fight. I'll get the tickets for the plane, or if it's close enough to drive, and then I'll get the tickets for the show, and let's go, because I want to have some fun. I want to get you in front of somebody, man. God. So,
dude,
let's do it.
Let's do it.
So you pick the date and time, and I'll make it work. So
let's do it.
I'll be flexible.
Holy cow!
Yeah. You ready?
Am I on camera?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Man, yeah. Oh my god.
Let's do it. I want to see you in the ring.
Dude, thank you so much.
Do what, Jock?
UFC 313, Vegas, March 18th or March 8th.
Would that work for you?
We'll make it work.
Okay. Let's do it. Yeah.
Didn't work now.
Jock, let's look at tickets and everything.
Oh my god.
That'd be a great one.
That's Pereira too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god.
I've never been to a UFC fight.
I haven't either.
Yeah. Let's go.
I wonder if I could get him with my press pass.
I don't know. We'll try.
Julius is press guy.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll need to work with your with your team.
Perfect example. We talked about this on the podcast. You don't know. I definitely wanted to come in general. I didn't have to fight to get out of bed.
For sure.
You know what I mean? I love talking. I love doing podcasts. But I was like, oh man.
Yeah. No, I've been thinking about it. I told Jock, I said I'm gonna do something because
oh man,
I want to see you in that ring.
It's coming. It's gonna happen 100% this year, I think.
Yeah. We're just gonna speed it up.
Yeah.
Whatever we got to do.
Right.
I mean, my goal was, I told Jock on our last podcast, my goal was Jelly Roll has a hell of an upbringing and background, and I want to do a podcast with Jelly Roll. I was like, let's start with Julius. Let's just keep finding more people to do podcasts with, and let's just do crazy stuff that's just going to connect, because eventually I'm going to run into somebody that knows Jelly Roll, and they're going to go, oh, yeah, he'll come do it. And then I want to take him over to Greene County Jail, have him perform for all the inmates, and then he's going to go down to Branson and do his big performance with Post Malone, Like, how wild would that be to get the interview on those guys, So
can you do them virtually, too?
Yeah, I think so, but I'll go wherever. Like, I want to see him in person, right? I want to shake that dude's hand, tell him how awesome he is. I got to, I guess it was a year and a half ago, I went to St. Louis, and I bought tickets where I got to be on stage and watch Jelly Roll on stage.
Yeah. And
that was pretty life-altering, because he came over and interacted and talked to us. But it's like, how do you hit a dude up for a podcast when he's in the middle of a performance, right? So
Exactly.
You're probably out of time, and that's fine if we run out of time, but I want to tell you this story. So in the middle of Jelly Roll's concert, I don't know if you've seen it. It was big on TikTok and social media. He stops his concert, goes, whoa, wait. He goes, turn on the lights. He goes, Betty Sue, is that you in the audience? And she's way back there. And this lady starts screaming. She's got this big quilt. And I'm like on stage, so I'm kind of looking where he's looking. And he goes, is that you? He goes, we went through kindergarten through 5th grade together. And he goes, how are you doing, girl? And he's like, hey, go get her and bring her back here. He's like, he's like, oh, your mom was with you too. And he remembered these people from like grade school.
Oh my
and he
Lord.
stopped the whole concert, had them brought back behind stage and did like a whole thing with them after the concert.
Jeez.
But she had what her blanket was grade school yearbook photos of her and him on this blanket. And he recognized her in the dark out in the crowd. And she was like, I don't know, 50, 60 rows back.
Yeah.
But stopped his whole thing, stopped his whole concert.
They must have been grade school sweethearts.
Yeah, something. And then
that was his first kiss.
And then he got in between. Yeah, he got in between. He got in between songs, and he stopped and he gave an entire speech about getting off of drugs, issues with pharmaceuticals, different stuff. And he gave this whole passionate, like, kind of political speech about, making your life better, doing all these things. And I've always heard some of the religion in his music, but when you feel the energy and passion and you see how just normal everyday guy he is to other people, I'm like, man, we need more of that, So that's been my drive to do the interview with him, and just his unique relationship with Bunny. Like, he was so down and out, and she took him under her wing and brought him back to life. And I mean, he flourished since then, and most people think that she's like the gold digger, and it's like, no, man, she's the one that got him going, and like, she believed in him, and so I think it's just really cool. That dude's and now he's losing weight like crazy. I don't know if you've seen it, but he's already dropped like 100 pounds.
Wow.
So he's on this journey to like become healthy, and it's so funny because he is this mega star, and he doesn't feel like it, and he doesn't necessarily he's got the confidence, but when you listen to his interviews, he talks about how he knows that he's overweight and that it bothers him every single day, and that's what he thinks about a lot. I'm like, dude, you're like the biggest rock star in the world.
Exactly.
And you're worried about like these insecurities that like everybody deals with, right?
Exactly.
So just that he's a normal human, So.
That was the craziest thing about meeting Strickland, was that like he walked into the gym, and there was no aspect of like, I'm Mr. Man. Dude's a former UFC champion, and he walked in, and I remember I was sitting there and I was getting my stuff on, and I saw him walk in, and I was like, oh shit, that's Sean Strickland. Whoa, he's walking in here. And he just walks in, and he walks literally directly to me, shakes my hand, is like, what's your name, dude? I'm like, Julius.
Nice.
And he's like, so where are you from? I was like, Springfield, Missouri. And he's like, nice, how long are you out here for? And I said, 3 days. And he said, 3 days? What are you gonna do in 3 days? I was like, I don't know, train a little bit. And he's like, man, I'm just messing with you. What's your record? And he just kept on asking me questions, talked to me a little bit. And he was like,
it's awesome.
He was a really cool dude. And then I remember there was another Ebo Aslan. He's a 205er in the UFC. He was walking by, and Sean was like, Ebo. And he like called him over here, and he's like, I want you two to spar tomorrow. And I was like, I'm kind of like, okay. And he's like, listen, you're only here for 3 days. You need to spar hard. You don't, none of this pitter patter BS. You two need to get in there.
Sounds just like him.
And man dance.
Yep.
You need to fight. And you can be friends afterwards, but I want you two to spar tomorrow and spar hard as fuck. And then I'm kind of just like, okay.
So did it happen?
Oh yeah, I sparred that dude the next day, and he sparred me hard.
Yeah.
He hit me very, very hard. He was the hardest hitter I'd ever sparred. I could tell he was throwing his punches like it was sparring. Like he was sparring hard, and he was hitting me hard. But I was like, man, if this dude really sat into these hurt. He definitely tried to. He started hitting me to the body, and I could tell he was trying to drop me.
Yeah.
And I was like, man.
He didn't want to let Sean down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he wanted to give you a little taste too.
Dude, he gave me a little taste. I was like, good God, man.
Are you guys done?